Thank you, Carol. I think we're going to end our questions there. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank all of you in the audience, all of our folks on the webinar, and all of our participants and presenters over the last 2 days. We got a tremendous amount of information, which has been really useful, educational, and provocative. I think we all go away with to-do lists and things that need to be worked on. And again, just thank you very much. So we're going to wrap up this session. I'm going to invite Robert Dysko to come forward, and he has the arduous task of summarizing all of the information that we got in the last 2 days and telling us how we're going to move forward on these subjects.
Thank you, Diane. So thank you to everyone who has stayed just specifically to hear my presentation. I appreciate it very much. I will try and do my best to summarize what we experienced over the last 2 days and talk about some steps going forward. Let's see. What is this? Yeah. So we started on Wednesday with some unannounced guest speakers who came by. I have to say I noticed that they didn't get their PowerPoint presentation in on time and had to use another type of visual aid, and I think that detracted from their presentation. But seriously, I think their presence in a way was helpful because it reminded us that we need to keep educating the public on the importance of animal research and the need for optimal transportation. And so what has been echoed somewhat in today's presentations about education, I think that was an illustration. We then had a test drive of the audience response system. Bruce and Ford led that. And one of the things that I thought was that it demonstrated that we do make some assumptions about how animal transportation works, then we don't always know. And hopefully after these 2 days, we know a little bit more or a lot more. And the exercise also demonstrated that this workshop has value in kickstarting the educational efforts within our own sphere. So we're starting by educating ourselves, then hopefully we'll be able to go outside and start educating others. Okay, so I'm just gonna, what I did, I took the itinerary, went through it and put it on the screen. In some spots I'll just talk about some specific presentations, and then in others I saved it for the end. So you'll see me sort of jump back and forth. So Bill gave an overview of the lab animal transportation. Greg and Carl gave a great set of presentations on how animals move through the air cargo system. I know I learned a tremendous amount there on exactly, where cargo holds are, what can they have, and just the whole rationale behind taking animals as cargo versus other products. And then Carl, of course, re-emphasized that in his presentation today. Bruce Clemens gave the presentation on IATA and how is air cargo controlled. Just point out that neither of the A's in IATA stands for animal. It's air and association. And that was very helpful to learn about the laboratory animal regulations that IATA has and how we can utilize them to help with our shipments. And then Rob Quest talked about crossing international borders, a European perspective. We learned what BIP stood for, which was Border Inspection Post, and the fact that they have a veterinary document that gets signed and that it enables the animals to travel to the other countries within the EU. And so they're focusing on entry at certain points and then dissemination throughout. I also remember him commenting about veterinarians not being able to fill out forms correctly. I think that has to do with the language barrier between our two countries. And having had the privilege of traveling overseas, I've noticed that Europeans have this wonderful ability to learn other languages. And so I would encourage them to learn how to speak American. Okay. We then also that morning had two presentations on land transportation, which went over all the different pieces of how land transportation works. And emphasized the point that even for air transportation, you often have two land transportation legs, or at least two, getting the animals to the airport and getting them from the airport to the recipient's location. And so it all folds together, and you need to keep that in mind. Kate Pritchett Corning gave a presentation on health status of animals, and her focus was on pathogen-freeness of animals and being able to maintain that during the course of a shipment, and the challenges that occur both with being on the vehicle but also being in the receiving area at either end of the trip if it's an air trip, because of the fact that there are other things that get placed there that are not SPF animals. And then Lynn talked to us about life science logistics, or actually the health of the animals themselves, and things that we need to recognize with regard to genetically monitored animals, shipping pregnant animals, shipping young animals, and how all of that needs to be thought about in the process of animal transportation. Then we had some species-specific presentations. Joe Simmons talked to us about non-human primates. Andy Smith talked to us about dogs and ferrets. And Bill talked to us about mice, rats, and small mammals. The main thing I remember here was that there were a lot of pictures of crates that didn't work very well. That's, I'll get more about that later. Fish, David Lanes from University of Oregon talked to us about zebrafish, which was very interesting because I knew absolutely nothing about shipping zebrafish. And I found it interesting that there was a specially designed bag that they had come up with to be the inside bag of the two-bag system, and how much has to be water and how much has to be air. And I just thought that that was tremendously informative for those of us that are pretty much shipping rats and mice all the time. Okay. Then this morning we had the parade of individuals who represented lots of different organizations and agencies. And so we heard from OIE, we heard from U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Centers for Disease Control, USDA, and then Dan talked to us about Virginia state legislation. So a couple of summary things that we learned here. The OIE sets the standards for worldwide animal health and trade. So it's not regulations, but standards. And animal welfare was identified as a priority for them in 2001. Customs and border protection is the last regulatory step in an importation effort. Everything else has to happen first before they approve the animals to leave the site. Contacting the fish and wildlife official at the port you intend to use for importation is key. The CDC was primarily focused on non-human primates today. They are involved with other animals, but that's their primary focus. The USDA, Carol talked to us about the new rule on importation of live dogs, which she just elaborated on a little bit ago. The other thing that was interesting, of course, to me was that the USDA is also involved in plant protection and quarantine. We have to remember the P in APHIS stands for plants, and that the food and the bedding can be an issue when you're bringing animals in from other countries because it can be held up by the plant part of this. We learned that the Commonwealth of Virginia had a very interesting set of definitions and regulations. And he discussed the fact that it was 50 states and 50 regulations, and there was reasons for that. And it just, in my mind, I was curious because we had the presentation the day before about how Europe worked this out to be able to get animals to pass through multiple countries. And I'm wondering if maybe we can at least address or look into the possibility of something in the United States that does the same thing, so that there's a way to eliminate the 50 state, 50 rule issue. I don't know. All of these organizations had lots of layers and pieces and parts. They had org charts that boggled the mind. And then who or what applies in an individual situation, the answer was always, it depends. And I think we need to remember that, especially as we're talking about checklists and we're talking about training import-export coordinators and things like that, is that there is no one answer that fits all situations. Every time you change the country or the species or the route of transport, you have something different that you have to do. Okay, then David did the great journey planning exercise for us, and then the repeat journey planning exercise that discussed problems. So we had a chance to utilize the interactive system and also review the challenges that could come forth in shipping animals. We then wrapped up today with perspectives, and we had Ford talk about an educator's perspective on informing the public regarding animal research and animal transportation. And his challenge, in fact, in finding some information that would be good to disseminate to high school students. I think that it is paramount for us in the global sense of us to look into finding easier ways that individuals who are interested, like he is, to be able to find this information fairly quickly. Kirk talked about the European perspective and about his new association, the European Animal Research Association, and the inroads they're trying to make to improve perspective on animal research overseas. Steve talked about an academic shipper's perspective, and one of the things I was glad he brought up, we talked a lot about all the paperwork to fill out. One of the things he mentioned that we deal with at my institution is the materials transfer agreement that has to go between people at two institutions to transfer materials. And the interesting fact that there are some situations where an investigator may have gotten animals under a guideline that they not be resold. You have to find the initial contract to make sure that you can complete the materials transfer agreement to let the animals go out. So it's another paperwork hurdle that those of us at institutions get to deal with. Okay, so some summary stuff of what did we learn. I learned that David covered a lot of the summary information during the journey planning exercises. He helped me out tremendously by doing that. Thanks, David. His run-through of what you needed to think about and what needed to happen and contingency planning was a great summation of a lot of what people had talked about earlier. We learned that laboratory animal transportation takes a lot of planning, and the number of plannings depends on which speaker was talking to you, but it was usually more than two. Lab animal transportation can involve a lot of people and agencies, and we learned that this morning. And it can involve a lot of paperwork. Okay. We learned that there are many challenges to shipping animals by air. It's a low priority for the airline industry. There's minimal cost benefit, and there are competing goods that can be shipped much more easily than animals. Overall, that process does go pretty well. But on commercial aircraft, there are minimal locations in which animals can be safely placed to be shipped. The temperature control of those spaces is variable. They do always have pressure control, and I was interested to know that. That was something I'd always thought was there was some cargo that did not. So all of the cargo has pressure control, but the temperature control is minimal to high tech, depending on which airliner you're on. The lab animals will travel with other animals and goods, despite what we all hope and dream. And I'll come to the corollary of that in a moment. And often they will be held at ground locations with other animals and goods. And so the corollary for us, I think, is that the container construction is extremely important. Not only in that it's solid enough construction that the animal inside isn't able to eat or bust its way out, but also that for our rodents that are pathogen-free, it is designed well so that it can withstand the trip and still have all of its integrity when it gets there, because we have to expect that those animals will be in contact with other objects. As Kate Pritchett pointed out, in the one case where they had the parvo outbreak, it actually wasn't, it was being near other mice, but it was the wild mice in the receiving facility that were there because the food had been stored in there. Training personnel is extremely important, and everybody advised for it, even though it's really not required. And preparation and contingencies are extremely important in the process. There are many reasons for the air shipment of laboratory animals, but it's a challenge for airlines, shippers, and consignees. And I learned what consignees means. Transporting animals by the most direct route with the fewest transfers is in the best interest of the animals. I think everybody agreed on that. It can be challenging to achieve that, but we feel that that meets the 3 R's in the best way, and is what we should be striving for being able to accomplish as we come up with solutions. So, steps going forward. So I think one of the things we need to do is continue to generate support for animal-based research and for the necessary transportation means associated with it. I put this in light of what I'm going to say next, so let me say that now. I think we need to establish a contingency mechanism, though, to replace commercial airlines as the primary means to transport animals across long distances. I think that there is enough unfortunate news about that sort of just pretending that some airline is just going to turn around and start taking the animals is not the way to go. Having said that, though, I don't think we should stop talking to the airlines. I think we should keep talking to them. Hopefully, we will be able to have more of them take the animals. But you still have the whole issue of financial cost benefit, cargo space, etc. They talked about the regional jets, and so Bill would often use Montana as his favorite state example, but there's not too much that flies into Montana except regional jets. So if you're going to put them on a plane, you can't put them on a plane because the regional jet doesn't have any cargo space, and then it means you have to truck it, and Montana's a big state. So it's a challenge in a lot of different ways that we need to address as contingency, but then also the primary. I think we need to put forward some educational materials for individuals in the field. I think for institutional import and export coordinators, some sort of handbook would be smart, whether it came from us or came from one of our associated associations. That would be good, that there would be something that they would be able to point to, knowing that we have the big "it depends" for so many different aspects of the transportation process. And it would be good to have some things for public consumption so that people understand a little bit more what goes on in animal research and transportation. And with that, I conclude the workshop. I thank everybody for staying and for attending on web. And hopefully you will be pleased with the things that come forward from this group, the Roundtable for Laboratory Animal Care, in the future. Thank you very much.